Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 153, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
Who is back again. We've got you on every week now in the run-up to Christmas, Joe.
What
a little Christmas present this is.
Next week as well. I told you, I'm studying. I'm keeping it fresh. I'm keeping it in my mind. I've got to know everything. I've got to be ultimate book of knowledge for video games for next week.
He's just sitting there looking over our shoulder. What's that article about? What are you reading there?
Yeah,
what games
much.
have you been playing, boys? Because next week is, of course, the biggest one of the year. The one that we always look forward to. You guys, admittedly, with a bit of nervous anticipation. The Retro Hour annual Christmas super quiz is going to be back next week.
Oh, it's so much fun. You know, we've had listeners say that they listen along with the quiz and kind of answer, and they probably beat us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Now, I don't want to rub it in, guys, but you have lost 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
Paul Drury and Ollie Wilmot are coming back next week. Now, we did actually talk about the possibility of swapping the teams up a little bit to make it a bit fairer. Paul and Ollie were outraged at that suggestion, so we're not going to do that.
Well, we've got a guy from Retro Gamer there, and we've got a guy who runs his own video game quiz.
Yeah.
You know?
But then again, we have the two guys who actually host one of the world's biggest retro gaming podcasts.
Absolutely.
Come on. So, on home turf this year. We need a win, boys.
And I'll just get...
we're bringing it.
I'll just get Joe to scream some metal at them if we lose.
Like the Aphex Twin video where the hair all just goes back.
Yeah.
Like so the Retro Hour Super Quiz is coming up next week. I'm going to be working on the questions while you boys are just taking it easy, rest up for the next week. And in fact, today, I didn't want to tax you too much. I thought we'd have a little look back on what an incredible year 2018 has been. Now, do you want a couple of little stats?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Okay. 51 episodes of the Retro Hour podcast released in 2018.
My God.
54.5 hours of podcasting we've done.
We ran over slightly.
Yeah. 11 events we've attended in the last 12 months.
11, that's crazy.
We've travelled 2,640 miles to get to these events. And also, in 2018, we have doubled our audience on this podcast as well.
That is awesome. And, you know, it really has felt mad. It doesn't feel like we've been to 11 events, though. But, yeah, we've been all over the place.
When I think about it,
year.
My liver probably agrees that it has been 11 events, yeah. But, it's been, by far, the best year of this podcast. Let's just... Let round up. What a year 2018 has been. And we're already looking forward to next year as well. We've got some very big plans. After a little break for Christmas, we're going to have a week off between Christmas and New Year. I think we need it. But listen, the only reason that we can make it this far is just thanks to you guys, really. I mean, if you weren't there supporting us every week, there'd be no point in us doing this show.
Yeah, and this kind of best-of show is really for listeners who haven't kind of been listening all year, or they may have missed bits or something, and we're just highlighting our favourite kind of little shows so they could maybe go back and go, oh, I missed that one.
And we do have some people who are still listening to episodes we recorded 3 years ago, so they might skip forward and hear this as a little teaser. What's happened in 2018? Listen, we love doing this show for you guys every week. I mean, there is something you could do if you'd like to kind of say thank you to us, and that is support our sponsor. Now, this is absolutely amazing. I mean, The Economist have been amazing to us over the last couple of months, supporting the Retro Hour podcast. And the thing about it is, when you hear the name Economist, you often think, all right, it's going to be a publication about economics and finance. But we've learned, since we started working with these guys, they cover so much in there as well.
Yeah, and we're learning so much. Like last week, we were talking about the article about China, and we just didn't know that China was the biggest video games industry in the world. And this week, we've got a really good book review, which is called Super Mario Management, which was basically about this book, and it's really interesting.
I mean, they're talking about the fact that, there is kind of a stereotype of the archetypal gamer who was like, a guy in his mum's basement eating pizza with the lights dimmed, bit overweight, wearing a string vest. But they're actually saying, I mean, the author of this book that they're talking about in this article, she's kind of wanting to change this worldview. And they're talking about how, in fact, video games are increasing our social skills rather than being played alone in quiet little bedrooms by yourself, especially the rise of online gaming and mobile games you can take anywhere.
I was going to say, I completely agree with what this author's trying to get across. They're not that stereotypical, like you say, nerdy kind of living with their parents anymore. So many people you meet from different kind of aspects of life and stuff are into gaming in some way or another, and it does bring people together as well. It brings communities together. You guys met through gaming as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I mean, you remember even stuff like the Pokemon Go craze, where people actually go meeting up in real world, like AR and that kind of thing coming in. I mean, it's a really good read. It's called Super Mario Management, the article. And if you want to check it out, we'd say get hold of your own copy of The Economist. Now, The Economist has been going for over 170 years. So, we said this last time we talked about The Economist, in this world now where you see so much false news around, and you need something you can really trust. And they help you kind of choose where you can stand on issues that matter to you. So we've actually got a free copy of The Economist for you. Now, The Economist is the smart guide to the forces changing your world, and you can help out the Retro Hour podcast and get your own free copy of The Economist in the post. Now, all you got to do, it's a print copy as well. It'll come through your door. Text the word retro and send that text to 78070. So if your free print copy of The Economist, text retro and send it to 78070, and you'll be really helping out the show. Right then, before we get into the clips, let's give another shout to people that we absolutely love, who also help us do this podcast, and that is our loyal donators, who've been there since day one. You know, we haven't always got a sponsor on this show, so it is you guys that help us keep doing this every week and pay for the hosting costs and the websites and everything we need to do, pay for, Joe's beard upkeep. So it doesn't go on that.
It's a bit scraggly at the moment.
I'm gonna say, you need more donations.
Yeah, I do, yeah.
No, but listen, anything we get, of course, goes 100% back into the running of the podcast. And for making a donation via PayPal or cryptocurrency, you will get a shout in a future episode of the show. Just like this week, Carl Carras,
Stuart Marshall,
Paul Edwards,
and Richard Pemberton, who all made donations into the running of the show. And you can do the same at theretrohour.com. What a year it's been.
Oh, it's been absolutely amazing. Like, honestly, some of the guests that we've got, I know we've previously had some good guests, but I really think we've topped it this year.
Now, one guy that we've always been interested in not only talking to, but, I followed his story since I was a kid. And this was John Draper. He's got a nickname, Captain Crunch. And he was a guy who really, when he was young, he worked with Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak from Apple, sold them their first blue box and kind of, give them the money to start Apple. Which is
really?
Like the biggest company in the world now.
And he was...
That's his claim to fame.
Yeah, quite the claim to fame.
He was working with blind kids, and a lot of the blind kids were kind of listening on these phone systems, and they'd hear the different codes, so they'd end up being able to hack the phone system. So this clip I've got is about John Draper from episode 129, and he's talking about him evading the FBI because they were after him after an article came out in Esquire magazine where they'd interviewed these blind kids about phone phreaking, and his name had been mentioned, and then it got put into the public light, and how he avoided the FBI.
Also, Esquire magazine did an article all about you in 1971, all about phreaking. I mean, were you cautious about doing that interview at first?
I didn't even want to do the interview. I didn't even want to do it. The phone freaks contacted Ron Rosenbaum. I didn't want them to contact Rosenbaum, but they did it anyway. There's 17 irresponsible blind kids that have no concept of what's cool and what isn't cool. So it was pretty much kind of like a really bad situation. So I called Ron Rosenbaum back, and he started asking me some of the questions that the blind kids had, and I tried to clear him up on the thing. I says, look, Ron, I really don't want to be part of this interview. I consented to a little bit about it. I says, just don't use my name, whatever you do. And please respect my privacy and stuff like that, because this is an illegal thing. And I don't want to get involved, because if you interview me, I'm almost for certain going to get busted. So I talked to him for a while, and they started asking me questions. I confirmed a few things, and some other things I set him straight. And it was probably about a 20-minute conversation with him. And then after we broke the conversation, things went on as normal. I would say about 5 or 6 weeks later, the Esquire article came out. I can remember what happened at the time. I was taking a Chem 1A class in San Jose City College, and I went down to the 7-Eleven store and saw the Esquire magazine. I took it back to my car because I like to sit in my car and study. It's nice and quiet there, and because I had a nice fan and a table set up and stuff. So I was sitting there like reading the magazine. I says, "Oh my God. Oh my God." Well, that just ends phone phreaking as we know it today. It just laid it right out there on the line, man. Gave the frequencies. They weren't exact, but they gave the whole concept. And anybody reading that article could probably figure it out. Woz certainly did. And Woz, when he took the article was on his coffee table in Jobs' house. Woz pulled up the article and read it. And he thought it was fiction. And then after reading it for a while, he says, that can't be fiction. So he says, let's go down to the Stanford Library. And they got this book on Bell System Technical Journal. And the Bell System Technical Journal gave all the frequencies of the blue box. And Wise says, oh my God, it's true. It's really a true article. I got to get a hold of this guy. And so it took Wise quite a while to find me, but he did.
What were the differences and changes in this freaking scene after the Esquire article?
Well, obviously, of course, the authorities saw it. And immediately what they did was they had known for a while that Denny and Jimmy and myself were on these conference calls. There's nothing they could do about it because it wasn't illegal. And I would never blue box from home, and neither would Denny and anybody else. So obviously they knew that I was able to blue box. And they tried to bust me on several occasions. In fact, I had just left the payphone 3 minutes before the authorities came to bust me. So I just got out of there just in time. This was part of the FOIA because we requested our FBI files. And this came out also, I think, in Phil Apsley's book, Exploding the Phone. So anyway, after that, things started really getting hairy. I was still living in Los Gatos. I wasn't doing anything on the phone at the time at all. All I was doing was just, going to school, studying, and doing my thing. But that was enough. That was enough to bust me because what they did was they had they pulled in all these phone freak kids from San Jose. And all these phone freak kids in San Jose had to testify before a grand jury. And one such person, Richard Caesar, had my phone number. And that was how they found me. They found me from my phone number being in his address book. Captain Crunch and my Los Gatos phone number, my regular home phone number.
Were you looking over your shoulder all the time at that point then before you got busted? It must have been a nervous time.
Well, after that, of course, I would do some evasive driving techniques to evade being followed. I think Craig can tell you about that. We call it the Draper maneuver. I also had a modified receiver in my car that would pick up the FBI's radio frequencies and the police frequencies. It was kind of built into the car. And I had this converter device that would convert the UHF, which normally would go from 430 to 470 megahertz. And FBI's frequency was 412.683. I know that really well. And so that was a frequency that I would tune to. And every now and then I would catch a little bit of chatter on that channel. Sometimes it would be scrambled, but if I'd see scrambled communication, I'd know it was the FBI because I know that they scramble their communication.
That is amazing. I'm so glad that we got John Draper on. I remember reading about John on Usenet and stuff back in the 90s and being fascinated by his story. 'Cause, I mean, you often don't know quite how much kind of the illegal kind of freaking scene and that kind of tied in with the rise of the computer industry.
Yeah, because they were the original kind of hackers, really. They kind of played with the systems, messed about with it, and learned how all of that stuff worked. And as he said, he was with Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs as well, who were also looking into that. And kind of, it's like Apple's first product was probably an illegal phone hacking device.
They gave rise to the richest company in the world now. It's just crazy. So love talking to John now. Another interview that we did back in the summer that for me was so good. I mean, I think back in the day you either fell into two categories. It was Street Fighter 2 or Mortal Kombat.
I like both.
I like both as well, but if you had to pick one.
You know what? Straight away my mind went to Street Fighter.
Yeah.
But then I was like, no, Mortal Kombat. But because my mind went straight to Street Fighter, I'm going to go for that just because I'm better at that, I think.
I have thrashed you on Mortal Kombat before.
Yeah, I get thrashed by nobody thrashes me at Street Fighter, but I get thrashed on Mortal Kombat all the time. So I'm going to go for Street Fighter.
That was such a changing point, though, wasn't it? Mortal Kombat with the digitized characters and the finishing moves and the whole kind of feel of it.
Well, for me, I was always a Mortal Kombat kid.
Yeah.
And I remember first, in this little clip I'm going to play here, I talk about my first encounter with Mortal Kombat.
Yeah.
And we actually were lucky enough to talk to Jake Simpson. Now, Jake actually worked for Midway, and he worked on stuff like the WWF WrestleMania series, and then later on he went to work for, after that he worked for Raven Software as well, stuff like Hexen 2, those great FPS games. But also, I had to ask him about Mortal Kombat, and we got a great little insight into kind of the development and what gave Mortal Kombat some of its unique little quirks. Well, I remember for me, Mortal Kombat was one of my most vivid memories. I think I was about 11 when that game came out, seeing it in the arcades, and I think I was away at like Pontins or something when I first saw it, and just kids were crowding around it all night. And we'd never seen anything like that. The digitised characters in the game as well, and the blood. Was that kind of Midway's golden egg when that franchise came out?
I'd say so, yeah. Ed had worked previously on a football game, and he wanted to do something with big sprites, and he had a Street Fighter 2 in his office, and he wanted to do a much, much faster version of Street Fighter 2, because Street Fighter 2 it's a fairly slow game. It's not more strategic than MK is. MK was designed to be a button masher. Anyone could be successful, and you could just walk up, button mash, and the guy would do things, and the AI was so brain dead on the first few levels that you would be successful. So he had everything all combined inside of there. He had the success of a player playing it. You felt powerful. The sound stuff, the Dan Forden sound stuff was very meaty and juicy. It felt, when you had a good successful thump on somebody, it really felt good. I could tell you some other stories, but Ed would really kill me about what some of the audio actually in that game is, but I'm not going to go into that because that's just really bad news. So yeah, Dan Felton's toasty, and that's because he used to come into Ed's office and play it, and he would say things. And there was a whole bunch of other phrases that didn't make it into the game. I remember Eric Kincaid, another artist who worked on MK3, I think it was, and he was all about the boo every time he took somebody out. We were amazed though at some of the results or some of the commentary that came out from Mortal Kombat. I remember one distributor rang up Midway to ask if there was a rape scene in it, and we were sort of looking at each other going, it's a video game, why would you do that? That's just, but then again, I suppose, yeah, it was pretty violent for what it was.
How did Midway kind of keep Mortal Kombat series fresh and, come up with new innovations? Because I remember there was still the finishing moves in the first one as well.
And babalities and friendship moves came in, didn't
they? Yeah, the babalities came, I think they were in 3 actually. And some of those actually came from just reading message boards and seeing what other people were saying. People claiming to have seen things that certainly were not in the game. Error macro is just, but that was just code. That was a text message left in the code base. Because it was part of the compilation process. That's all it was. And then people were seeing this and go, oh, there's a new character called Eramac. Well, no, there wasn't. But there was in the second one because they picked up on it and went, yeah, right, why not? The noob Cybot, that's Boone and Tobias backwards. And some of it, like I said, the babalities and the animalities, they came purely from suggestions of seeing people talking about it. People saying they'd seen it. It wasn't there. So we thought, well, stick it in. Why not?
Well, I remember at school, you kind of fell into 2 camps. I guess whether you had a Mega Drive or a SNES, but was Street Fighter 2 seen as the main rival? So at school it was always Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter 2.
No, Street Fighter 2. Although, I'll tell you a story about the original Mortal Monday. That was quite entertaining because, of course, Midway had made a big boob. They had sold the rights for all of their games to Acclaim, to do ports for. It was a generic deal. It wasn't a very specific game by game. They just sold the rights for like the next 5 years to all of the games that Midway put out. And of course, Mortal Kombat rolls along and Acclaim's rubbing their hands. They went away, they got this software house, I think it was Iguana, I'm sure, to do a port. And they did not do a line-for-line port. What they did was they played the game and then tried to create their own version of it. And it was not good. And I remember Ed being very, very upset, and he would not give approval for this thing to be released. But in the meantime, Acclaim has gone away, spent millions on this whole Mortal Monday commercial. You remember the kid in the street in the, Mortal Kombat, all that. They spent a lot of money, and they were all set to produce this and ready to go, and Ed would not release it. He would not sign his approval. They actually sent him a lawsuit on the Friday before the Mortal Monday to force him to actually sign approval so they could actually sell this game on the Monday. He was that unhappy with what was put out there in the world.
See, that is one thing I love about doing this show, that we find out stories like that you would never of a million years imagine that Mortal Monday, that was like the biggest thing in video games back in the early 90s, came that close to actually almost not happening.
I was just listening to that then and actually became really interested, and I was just like, okay, I need to go back and listen to that again because I was like, wait, I don't remember this part. So.
It was great, yeah, so interesting.
I also remember kind of all the made-up cheats, exactly what he was saying. People would be like, oh, there's an error code here, or there's this secret hidden character if you fight the boss 10 times backwards or something.
Stuff that just flat out didn't exist in the game at all.
In between the matches with the little codes where you press the buttons and stuff, like, if you do this, you get to be reptile, and just never actually figuring it out because none of it was true.
It had a lot of that about it, though, didn't it? Like, a lot of hidden kind of secrets and Easter eggs and stuff, so it was great to get that story. Now, we do cover a lot of different types of games on this podcast. Now, one that I know you love doing, Ravi, was a little chat about Westwood Studios that we did with Lewis Castle back in the summer as well. Talking about games like Dune, Blade Runner, and Command & Conquer, one of your all-time favourites.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Command & Conquer because Command & Conquer was like the kind of multimedia game for me. When they had a disc, Command & Conquer could have been released on disc, but it wouldn't have had the full motion video. It wouldn't have had the thumping soundtrack, all the extra bonuses that you got with kind of CD that really turned it into a real cool experience. And he's going to be talking about all of the amazing music in it by like Frank Kaplacki and how they source the actors. Kane, for God's sake, what a good enemy Kane was.
Well, let's have a listen back to him from episode 141. Well, let's talk about Command & Conquer. I mean, what a massive game. That really did change everything. And when approaching that game, I mean, how did you cast actors and decide on graphics and also create sound effects as well? That must have been a big job.
It was. So the Command & Conquer was being built as the Swords and Sorcery game, and as we were going along, we realized that we were going to hit the launch of the CD-ROM, 700 megabytes, which was, almost 700 times as large as the biggest piece of media, 1.4 megabyte disk. So we had said, well, what are you going to do with all of this? And I know that Joe was deeply involved in the game design and the balance, and Brett and Edie came up with a storyline around the sort of biblical echoes of Cain and his Brotherhood of Nod. And so we said, oh, well, what we should be doing, Westwood, even back in Dune, had these little animatics to tell the story and set the stage. We should be doing these as full motion video with audio. And the problem is a single-speed CD-ROM just doesn't have very much data throughput. It's 144 kilohertz, I think. It's really, really small. And so we had to figure out how to do that compression. So we brought some people in from university that understood some cutting-edge vector quantization that was going to go into some of the MPEG-3 stuff eventually. And then we built up on top of some of the compression algorithms I had written many years before that used a variety of compression techniques. And I remember when we were doing the initial videos, we had a little dressing around the outside, like a border, and Brett goes, it needs to be full screen. It needs to look like a television screen, or like you're watching a monitor. And we were explaining to him that how difficult it is because there's so little throughput. And he goes, "Oh, you're just being lazy." And this is kind of Brett's way to drive people. And he was right. We got it to work. So once we knew that we could do the video, we had to fill all that. We had all this time to fill, basically, many minutes. And so our CG artists jumped into it and started using Max to do some stuff. Aaron Powell, and did some amazing stuff with early units. I mean, today it looks pretty crude, but at the time it was truly like earth-shattering. And so we were just really all homegrown stuff. As far as the acting goes, there was a local theater troupe. We hired the guy who ran it was Joe Kukin, and he's quite a talented actor, and he's a great director. He now has a theater troupe in Vegas again. And Joe was interviewing for all the different roles, and we were using local talent because we couldn't afford to go out and get Hollywood talent for the first, or the very limited amount for the first CNC. So we were using a lot of local talent and people who worked at the studio. And Joe directed everything, and he was the one who was saying, here's how Cain should be, here's how Cain should be. We went through many, many Cains. And eventually we just were looking at the tapes, and Brett goes, why don't we just have Joe do it? He does a better Cain than anybody. So we asked him, and he said, yeah, I guess I can act and direct. That should be okay. And that's what set the stage for him being, I think, one of the greatest villains in video game history, actually. I think Cain was amazing. So all hats off to Joe. He was our driving force for all that cinematic wonder.
I think you made an interesting point there about the fact that you went from developing for, essentially, for floppy disks that were like a megabyte in size. A CD-ROM being like 700 megs, it must have felt like an infinite amount of space to fill. I mean, was that a bit overwhelming when you sort of we've got all this?
Yeah, didn't take us long. So we shipped Blade Runner on 4 CD-ROMs. So yeah. I guess really it didn't take us long at all. A couple of years later, we couldn't even fit on one. So So, but no, the very first time we were looking at CDs, we were just like, oh my God, this is massive. I don't think the first CNC even came close to filling it. Certainly by Tiberian Sun, we were using every scrap we could find. Part of the reason also was because the video had to be compressed down to that very slow bit rate, a very low bit rate of 144 kilohertz. So you can get quite a lot of video on a 700 megabyte surface when you're only using 144K per second. So it was a huge amount of space and a massive ability for us to put a lot of graphics and stuff out there. They were quite slow though, single speed CD-ROMs. Nowadays we tend to forget that because we don't even know the CD-ROMs are gone, right? So it's all solid state now.
Well, the music as well on Command & Conquer was absolutely fantastic. And you mentioned Frank was your in-house musician. What was it like the first time you guys heard Hell March?
Oh, amazing! That show that's why we put it on the trailers and everything else. And I think that was the one where people told me that they were eagerly anticipating the next Command & Conquer game, and when they heard that it was Hell March, they got tingles. Because it just hit every chord. And I think Frank's he loves funk and he loves the hard hitting rock, and so he found this great voice for CNC that I think has yet to ever been. And nobody's ever really come close to something like that, where I think it's almost like a unique music genre that was invented for a game, and it just fits so perfectly this feeling of military meets modern age aesthetic.
You were so fanboying over that interview, Ravi.
Oh, totally, yeah. And, it just makes you really think when CD-ROM came out, like how limited that technology was at first, because people hadn't developed that video compression. They hadn't developed ways of streaming from it straight away. So, all that kind of had to be created.
Yeah, people were doing shovelware and that, trying to fill the space, I guess, wasn't it? But one thing about that era, I mean, obviously podcasting wasn't around in the early 90s. The way that we found out about it was magazines or television shows. Now, on this podcast, do you remember in our first year, I think, we brought Dave Perry from Games Master, kind of out of gaming retirement. We did his first podcast that he'd done. First time we talked about games in years. And now he's got his own, YouTube series and that up and running again. Great to see he's back into gaming. But also, the other big show that was on at the time was Bad Influence. Now, that was with Andy Crane and Violet Berlin. Now, Andy Crane had never done a podcast before. We've been asking him, because, I work for the same company as Andy. So every now and then I drop a little message. Do you want to come to this podcast and talk about it? Oh, I don't know anything about video games. I'll just embarrass myself. And look, just come on. It's chilled out. When he got into the zone, he was flying, wasn't he? He loved talking about it and reminiscing about those days.
What was his knowledge like?
Well, he's actually quite surprisingly good.
Oh, really?
He talks in this little clip here about... Because you've got to think, Bad Influence was on for 4 series. Mm-hmm. It ran from 1992 to 1996. So when it started, it was like Super Nintendo, Mega Drive. Yeah. By the end, it was N64 and that kind of thing. Massive change, probably the biggest change in the 90s. Maybe even in the history of video games consoles at home, that kind of 5 years. So in this clip, he kind of talks about the fast rate of technology development in that era. Think of all the systems that came out during those 4 or 5 years that Bad Influences on TV. You started with the Mega Drive and the SNES, and by the end it was like PlayStation and N64 or Ultra 64, I think it was called at first. Did it feel like it was such a rapidly changing industry, and was it quite hard to keep up with it all sometimes?
I was kept up to speed by a very good research team. Now, remember, I refer you to our previous remark. I am not a gamer, I wasn't a gamer, and I'm not a gamer. I don't have a console anymore. I think there might be a PS2 in a wardrobe upstairs from one of my girls. And again, I only have daughters, and I'm sorry to go down that route. These days it's different, but boys were gamers and girls weren't when my children were younger. They're all in their 20s now. So I didn't have the gaming experience at home. I didn't have a son going, Dad, can I have an Xbox? Dad, can I have this? Dad, so the whole thing has sort of faded away from me. But they would show me what the latest technology was, and I'd be like, wow, that's amazing, the first PlayStation coming out and the disc going in, and it's wonderful stuff, rather than a cartridge. Graphics getting better and better and better. And these days, you watch Click or Swipe on Sky or the BBC, the games are phenomenal, aren't they? Absolutely phenomenal. I just wonder whether I've left it too late to dip back in. You see, I think if I got back in, I'd be so far behind that, the last game, the Street Fighter game, Street Fighter 2, I think, you look at the graphics on that and you think, it's moved on a bit now, hasn't it? I'm not sure whether I'd be any good at anything like that anymore. My daughter plays. She's got a boyfriend who's got, would it be a Switch? Would that be right?
Nintendo, yeah.
Yeah, and he's got a PS, whatever the latest one is, and so they plug it all in and they play online. Playing online, can you imagine? Back in the day, we did a piece on bad influence about how you could make an international phone call for the price of a local call, because we were talking about VoIP, using the internet for voice conversations. But obviously, back in the day, you had to pay for the internet dial-up at home, and your friend in America would have to pay for the internet dial-up then. But that was the idea of put a headset on, talk to your computer talks for free on the internet to another computer, and you could have you've made a local call, but you're making an international conversation. Now you put your headset on and you're talking to kids all over the world and you're all playing the same game or you're working as a team on something. I think it's brilliant as long as it's not all you do. Well, I wonder what Bad Influence would be doing now. Bad Influence would be defending children who play games but encouraging them not to play them all the time. Remember, video gaming was at one point seen as, the thing that was going to ruin children's lives forever. And it still gets blamed for a lot of things, doesn't it? Screens, or perhaps more generically, screens are blamed for ruining children's lives. But video gaming particularly, they're all playing these games, they're all shooting people, they're all going to grow up to be mass murderers and psychopathic killers. Hey, guess what? They haven't. The idea, we would defend gaming on Bad Influence as well. Sometimes when the newspapers had headlines about it, I would hold up the newspaper and say, look, you may have read this, and then we would, put our side of the story, put the gaming industry side of the story, because it's just a leisure activity. And as long as you moderate it and don't spend 24 hours a day, 365 days a year in your bedroom with a headset on, it's just another way of spending your money and enjoying your leisure time. I think it's a fantastic pursuit.
Well, you mentioned about technology there, and the biggest technology probably in history came around during the time that Bad Influence was on air with the rise of the internet in the mid-90s. I mean, did you kind of see a change there, and did you really have an idea how big the internet was going to be?
Yeah, oh man, if I'd known that, I'd have bought shares in Facebook and Google. Wouldn't we all? No, I don't think people who were there at the outset of the internet realised quite what it was going to become. I don't think we knew that computers were going to be part of our lives in terms of, as we referred to earlier, the technology of making life easier, faster, better, slicker, controlling things. Now we've got, fridges that'll order milk for you when they run out. You can drive home and think, the central heating's not on, tap your phone and switch it on. That's what we thought. The social aspect of the internet, I'm not sure anybody really predicted that. I thought maybe it was called originally, wasn't it, the information superhighway?
Yes.
So it was going to be like a reference tool. I think people thought it was going to be like a massive Wikipedia. But it's become so much more. But nobody knew that then, absolutely not. That you could watch TV on it, that it would have social media. We were excited by texting. So social media is just, I don't think anybody realised quite how massive that was going to become. We certainly didn't. We had no sense of it at all.
What I loved is you can still hear the excitement in his voice as well when he talks about it. I
was going to say, considering he said to you, he knew he was, I know NAFL and all this. he knew a few bits and bobs, and he seemed pretty passionate about it. So
yeah, which after all this time's great. And I mean, at the end of the interview, he said to us off air, didn't he? He goes, actually, lads, I've really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, because he was really into technology anyway, wasn't he? So he's got a lot of stuff that he's remembered, and then suddenly going, yes.
Yeah. So that was a great episode. If you didn't check it out, episode 120, all about the backstory on Bad Influence. Now, coming up in the next few minutes, we're going to hear stories from Activision, Bullfrog. Do you remember that episode we did with Glenn Corpus, talking about Populace? A bit about Kevin Mitnick as well, the world-famous hacker. Now, before we do that, obviously, Christmas is here. Everywhere you go, the Christmas songs are playing in the shops. The adverts are on TV. Best thing about this time of year, though, sitting at home, the fire on, playing your favourite video game, beautiful drink in your hand. Oh, can't beat that, can you?
Definitely.
Maybe a beer?
What about these? 2 words that are going to make your ears prick up. Free beer.
There we go.
Now, this is thanks to our very good friends at beer52.com. Now, think of this as our little Christmas gift to you. As a listener to the Retro Hour podcast, we would like to thank you for checking us out in 2018 and for your support as well by giving you a free case of craft beer. Now, all you got to do to claim your free case, Open your phone right now, open your web browser on there, tap in beer52.com/retro. So that is beer52.com/retro. And you will get some special beers for free in for Christmas. Now, Beer 52 is the world's most popular monthly craft beer discovery club, searching out incredible and exclusive small batch craft beers from the world's greatest breweries and bringing them back to their members as well. I've always wanted to be part of like a beer club. I always think it sounds really cool.
Yeah, it sounds really nice, and like some of the beers that they've got, they sound gorgeous. Like the Keller Pilsner, you know what Keller is? It's the German for cellar. So it's the kind of beers from down the cellar.
Well, the thing at the moment is they actually do like a different country or different theme every month. At the moment, they're doing West Country. West Country Road Trip Month, it's called. So essentially,
nice.
It's the best beers from like Bristol and that kind of area of the country too. And they offer something for everyone, if you're into dark ales or lighter beers. You can kind of pick what's in your packs as well. So not the kind of beers that you'll find in your local supermarket. And you also get a 100-page ferment magazine in the box as well if you're interested in the story of beer and you want to learn more as well. So you can get your free case of beer. All you have to do is pay the £5.95 postage, that's all. And you will get 8 craft beers sent to your house. Next day delivery. The ferment magazine's included too. They'll even put a couple of snacks in there as well. So.
That's awesome.
Snacks and beer. What can you do?
Is there anything better at Christmas time?
No.
Come on. So all you've got to do to claim yours is head to beer52.com/retro. There's no minimum commitment. You can just take the free case if you want, try the beers, see what you think. If it's not for you, then you can pause or cancel at any time. But don't miss out on this chance to get the beers in for the festive season. Head to beer52.com/retro. Now let's get into more of our best moments from 2018. You love Michael Lowry, didn't you? That was a great episode. Early internet adventures.
Yeah, so Michael's like a British computer security and kind of social networking expert. He originally started by registering lots of sites like Harrods.com for himself.
Cyber squatting.
Yeah, cyber squatting. He was one of the original cyber squatters. But Kevin Mitnick is probably the most notorious hacker in the world.
Yep.
And he got put in solitary confinement in America. This was a massive case with the FBI, and he was actually wiretapping the FBI at the time. Michael ran a server, and Kevin was actually spying on Michael.
Crazy.
And Michael was spying on Kevin, spying on him. So here's the clip.
Well, obviously, security was a lot more rudimentary back then. I remember reading stuff about, like, Robert Schifrin's hack on Prestel back in the 80s, and obviously the famous Kevin Mitnick had an account on one of the first public access ISPs. I mean, were you actually on the same ISP that he was? Did you actually have any interaction with Kevin?
I've known Kevin for a long time. I used to work with a guy called Neil Clift, who Kevin was obsessed with. And rightly so. Neil was a brilliant VMS hacker, probably one of the best hackers ever. Had high-profile jobs for Microsoft and Google. They poached him for vast amounts of money in the end. But he hides away in the background. But Kevin was obsessed with getting his hacks for VMS systems. And so I dealt with him before his first arrest. This was in the 80s. And then he reappeared. I think he was on the run at this point. I think he'd skipped all his bails and everything, and he was on the run because the US Marshals Service was after him. So he must have been convicted. And he was using HiCom, which was, again, my machine, because it was a public access VMS machine. Now, I had chatted to him, and I gave him a legal account at one point on the condition that he didn't do anything bad. That lasted a day. So he was not too happy with me for removing him from that. I wanted him to go legal, but no. I was working with DEC at the time anyway. I made it fairly clear to him that I was after him. I was going to try and catch him. But we had this kind of standoff. Not friends, but not massive enemies situation. One of the systems managers at Loughborough then discovered he was looking at disk space and noticed that disk space was vanishing. And he discovered that Kevin was logging everything I did, so every screen, every key press on one of the Unix machines, which I used to get to HiCom because it had screen on it so I could run multiple sessions. So we had this interesting situation where Kevin was monitoring me. If we let him know that we'd caught him, he'd stop using it. So we had him in a place where we knew he was. And he didn't know that we'd spotted his monitoring. So we started monitoring him at the network level before the machine. So we were looking at his literal every IP packet. I had to go on for a year being monitored by both the FBI and Kevin. So everything I was doing was being monitored, recorded into federal evidence. And then Kevin was using anything he could find that I was logging on, so I couldn't tell him or let him know that I'd done it. So I still had to log on to machines with my passwords. I still had to talk to people privately. I still had to do all my work with him watching everything I did. I would occasionally, if I wanted to do something like work secret, I'd log on to a different machine. But basically, I lived my life being monitored by the FBI and Kevin for a year and a bit. That was so weird.
Well, how did you feel when Kevin eventually got caught?
Quite pleased. The story of how he got caught's been turned into some weird urban folklore. Always makes it seem like one person caught him when there was a huge team following Kevin, monitoring everything he was doing. I don't hold any grudges. I mean, I'm glad he was caught. I do talk to him now. Again, we're not friends, but we're not enemies. We chat occasionally.
You must have had a healthy respect for his technical ability then.
I don't want to be mean about him. He was not a brilliant hacker, but he was a fantastic social engineer. You've got to give him credit for that. His skills in social engineering were second to none. And we watched him get extra numbers out of BT in seconds. He could just call people up and turn them to his will just by phoning them up and pretending to be other BT engineers. He knew the lingo. He knew how to talk to them. He was just brilliant at getting information out of people. And yeah, can't fault him for that. I think he's probably, Neil Clift might be the best hacker in the world, but Kevin Mitnick is probably the best social engineer.
You can tell the clips at Ravi Pick, can't you? This the underground of computing.
Yeah. So like this guy was getting chased by the FBI, like all of them.
But I mean, that is one thing I do love about doing this show. I mean, when we came up with the idea, we said we don't just want to do video games. Because we love games, but we love computers and technology as well.
Yeah, and kind of these guys are the absolute pioneers. Like all these scams that go on online now and all of these kind of people ringing up and faking to be people. You know, Kevin was the one that started it all.
Well, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, today, though, security on computers and systems is more important than ever, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the fact these guys found those early vulnerabilities, it's interesting to find out those kind of techniques they use.
Thanks to them, we put sellotape over our laptop cameras.
Even Mark Zuckerberg does that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
We see pictures of Facebook's office. It's funny. Now, let's have a little talk about Bullfrog. They're a legendary company. And earlier this year, we were joined by Glenn Corpus. He actually listens to the podcast, which I thought was great. We're massive fans of Bullfrog. Games like Syndicate. You're a huge Syndicate fan, weren't
massive Syndicate fan. But if you also look at the later stuff that they did, like Magic Carpet and Dungeon Keeper, that was really pioneering stuff.
And we got loads of stories about those games. But I think the bit that I'm going to play here is when he's talking about kind of the development of Populace. And obviously that was such a big game. Really probably the first God kind of game, wasn't it, Populace? Yeah. And the fact that he talks about how much luck was involved and how close that game really almost didn't come to fruition. So this is really interesting. Glenn Corpus talking about Populace. Populace became, such a big game and groundbreaking in so many ways. I mean, it's often credited as being the first kind of, real God game. So where did that kind of idea and concept of the game come from then?
This is the thing which I really love about Populace and it reminds me, slightly arrogant way of putting it, but it reminds me of Rubik's Cube. Erno Rubik wasn't trying to make a puzzle. He was trying to make a weird piece of engineering where the corners, managed to hang on in a spooky way that, and it just turned out that once you stuck the stickers on, it turned out to be, possibly the best puzzle ever. And Populace was a similar thing. I was just messing around with this landscape. I didn't know what was going to happen. And very quickly, in that initial 3-day demo, when it was just a landscape which you could click on and modify, it sort of became obvious that flat land was going to become the currency. That was all Peter's doing, the way that actually worked out. But it kind of fell out of the system. It wasn't designed, and quite how we ended up there with this sort of indirect control I suppose it's a bit different from other God games because it really was very indirect, the control.
Well, it's amazing how you could manage to fit such a huge world on, one floppy disk. And the kind of generation of the landscapes led to having around 500 levels.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting thing as well, because the game was basically multiplayer only for the longest time. I mean, we had a serial cable running between the ST and the Amiga, which we initially used for file transfers, because at the time we started it, you couldn't really read an ST disk on an Amiga, and you definitely couldn't read an Amiga disk on an ST. So we literally had terminal programs sending files across this null modem cable, and we also used a null modem cable for playing Stunt Car Racer. Populace, the game, what we used to do was we'd work on it all day, and we'd stop work about 7 in the evening, and then we'd play it multiplayer for about 3 hours, and then Peter would use that to inform how the computer player should work. The gameplay was multiplayer only, and the single player game was a computer opponent that was designed to beat me, and there were a bunch of variables that you could set. Like you could say the computer's allowed to raise a lower land, do swamps, do earthquakes, do volcanoes, floods, whatever, and also the computer would have a speed, like how often it was allowed to think. So on an easy level, it might only be allowed to think every 20 ticks of the game. On its hardest levels, it would be thinking every tick. So you literally had this thing that it's in Populace, in the release Populace. There's a mode called Custom Game, which probably hardly anyone would have ever played. But that was the only game that there was in it. But luckily, the producer at Electronic Arts was a guy called Joss Ellis, who'd also been the producer on the game we did for Firebird on Drury, but when he was at Firebird, he'd also worked on the Sentinel, and I don't remember exactly it happening this way because I was also a big Sentinel fan. Maybe me and Josh got talking about Sentinel, but we ended up sort of ripping off the way that the level progression worked in that. If you remember, in Sentinel, you'd sort of finish a level, and then the number of points you finished with was the number of levels you skipped. There were 10,000 levels in the Sentinel. And Populace basically worked the same way. You'd skip some levels, and just like Sentinel, if you couldn't do the level you were on, you could go back and play the previous one by entering the code, and then finish it with more points, and you could skip the level that you just had trouble with, and exactly the same mechanism worked. And the file, there was just a text file with 500 lines in it of I think it was actually only 100 lines of different level settings. And each of those constituted 5 of the levels in the game. And that file was knocked together in about 2 days, including all the tuning, right at the last minute of the development. So if that hadn't got in, I don't know what people would have been playing, because they weren't playing it multiplayer and they weren't playing custom games. So it was another piece of luck on that game.
Yeah, because I was reading that there was a cheat that was made so that you could actually get to the end of Populace and see what the end was like, and then you realised that there was no end had actually been put in there.
I'm pretty sure there wasn't. No, you could basically, the names of the levels were the codes to get in, and you could kind of guess them because it wasn't exactly done with crypto strength security. It was just sort of a sort of simple little checksum, and you could, and so you could probably play about 10 levels, guess what the parts of the level names were, and then try sticking a few of them together at random, and like you might get one that worked, So it was strange that you could get away with things like that. But the entire level progression was about 2 days' work. So there was no level design in it or anything. It was just a bunch of numbers to feed the fractal generator and stuff like that, and a bunch of flags to say which of the effects each you or the computer opponent were allowed to use.
So crazy when you hear that a game like Populace was essentially blagged. It's I just love getting stories like that. Now, in episode number 134, we did one that you, Ravi, I know you were a big fan of this episode. I loved it as well. We had David Brevik on the show. I'm getting the story of Blizzard.
Yeah, so David Brevik, he was absolutely amazing. He did Diablo, which was one of the really good titles that kind of went from turn-based gaming to real-time gaming, and that kind of changed the world of RPG games, especially Warcraft later on becoming kind of real-time gaming. And this is a clip where he talks about his resistance to real-time gaming until he actually tried it, and then he's like, oh my God, that's amazing. So how controversial was the real-time phone call you got, and kind of how divided was the office whether you should have a turn-based Diablo or a real-time version?
Right. Yeah. It was incredibly controversial, mainly because of me. And so I loved the turn-based feel that we had. Not only that we had, but these types of games had, like Rogue and Morian Angband, things like that, NetHack. All of these games had really great turn-based mechanics and tension, and I wanted to capture that with Diablo. And so they called up, and Blizzard South, and they had done kind of this, hey, we're taking strategy stuff, we're making it real-time. We think that you should do the same thing with Diablo, take it, from this turn-based thing to a real-time thing. And we were doing it was turn-based, but it was kind of a complicated turn-based. Like, it wasn't my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. It was different turns took different amount of times. We can call it, tenths of a second, or you can call it frames or whatever you want. But like, moving diagonally took 1.4 seconds, and horizontally or vertically took 1 second, and swinging your sword may only take like 0.2 seconds or whatever it was, and so it was turn-based, but it was kind of like there was different weights to your actions. And they said, well, it's really, we really think that you should try it. We think that it'll make a big difference. And I just really didn't want to lose that kind of tension. There was nothing more tense in my life than the experience of doing this turn-based combat, where I've been playing this character. All of these games, these Rogue and Morian Angband stuff, were permadeath games. So you died in the game, your character died in the game, that was it. The game was over, and you lost everything. And so making these turns, and you're getting down to the end, you find yourself in a stuck situation. You're like, oh my God, I'm running out of time. This is a disaster. What do I do? You would get up from the computer, you'd walk around the lab. It's like, oh my God, I'm going to lose like this 2 weeks of work on this character. It's the highest level I've ever gotten. I can't believe this. I'm in deep doo-doo at this point. And so you would plan out all of these things and look at your equipment. And like, there was this intense period of time where you're kind of agonizing over which moves you were going to do. And that inevitably you died. It was very sad, and your character was deleted, and you didn't play for 3 days as you calmed down, and then you come back and play again. But I loved that feeling. I loved the intensity of that. And I thought real time is just not going to have that, right? You're not going to have this moment where you're like, oh my God, I'm about to lose everything here. I've got to really think this out. And is there anything I can do to kind of give myself the best odds I can of succeeding? And so I didn't want to lose that kind of spirit. And so I was very adamant that I did not want to do this. And so we started talking about it as a group in the office, and people started hearing more and more about it. And pretty much everybody in the entire office was in favor of changing it into real time, or at least giving it a try. And eventually, I was still pretty stubborn about the entire thing, but I was democratic, and so we got together in the kitchen, and everybody got a vote, and we voted whether or not that we wanted it to be real time or turn based, and the vote was overwhelming, 80% plus of people that wanted it to change to real time. And so I said, okay, well, we'll give it a try. And then so I called up Blizzard, and we were still kind of work for hire at this point. We had signed the contract to do Diablo, and we weren't Blizzard North at the time, and said, well, yeah, we can do this, but it's going to take a lot of time and work and stuff. And so we need a little extra money to make this massive change. And so they agreed to a little bit more money. And I said, okay, well, we'll do that. And so I came in the office on Friday, and I said, okay, we're gonna make this big change. Everybody come back. Everybody go home. We'll come back on Monday, and we'll have it running. And so, or at least have a prototype or whatever. But there's nothing for anybody can do while I make this massive change. So everybody left, and then I completed the work in like an afternoon, in a couple hours. And changed it from turn-based to real time. And again, I've said this many times, but I can still picture it. It's like one of the most clear moments of my career where I was playing this warrior, and I clicked on a skeleton. I walked over. He walked over and he bashed the skeleton. As soon as I clicked, he walked over and he smashed the skeleton. And it felt so good. I was like, oh my God, it was incredible. The sensation, the experience was. Again, it was like, the heavens parted and the angels sang, and like the light shone down into the office kind of thing. I mean, it was like, oh my God, this is just so incredible. It was just night and day. Obviously, how could I have ever thought that turn-based was the right thing? I instantly had flipped. It was obvious that this was going to be a winner. This was something magical, and so from that moment on, we never looked back, and kind of changing it from turn-based to real-time was just an incredible stroke of luck and genius that made it something that makes Diablo stand out forever.
Imagine if you didn't have that revelation, though.
Yeah, it's mad to see the kind of development and all the points that we've talked about, even on this tiny show, like the development of CD-ROM and the development of hacking and stuff like this. It's crazy.
It's a big show.
Yeah.
Now, movie games. You got any favourite movie games? Games based on movies?
Games based on movie. There's a couple. The Lord of the Rings games.
Yeah.
They come to mind straight away. I had them on the GameCube. Oh man, there's probably a couple more, but that was the only. As soon as you said it, that was like the first one was like, whoom, yeah, Lord of the Rings.
Batman Returns. I always remember that one.
Yeah.
I mean, generally the movie licenses didn't have a reputation of being kind of very strong games at first, did they?
You can think of lots of crap ones.
Yeah.
Straight
easily,
away.
yeah.
In the 8-bit era, there was definitely really bad ones. Later on, they got to stuff like Lion King and stuff like that.
Aladdin
They got a lot better.
Yeah.
One of those earliest ones, I mean, we did an episode back in episode number 123, and that was with David Crane. Now, David, obviously, he was the guy behind Pitfall.
Yeah.
Legendary game. And we learned all about Activision as well. You know, Activision kind of came out of Atari, and kind of the working ethics that they didn't like at Atari set their own company up. To this day, Activision's still one of the biggest publishers in the world. But he also gave us a story about how they got the Ghostbusters video game license, which was a very interesting 8-bit game. And we're going to find out a little bit of because it was very different. Yeah. I was a Ghostbusters fan as a kid.
You're
Loved
a huge Ghostbusters fan, weren't
I'm one of the biggest Ghostbusters nerd you'll ever meet. But then, playing that game, I was like, well, it doesn't really fit in all that much with the movie and the TV show. So I had to ask him a bit about the development of it, and we got some quite interesting replies from him.
It's not unusual, even then, for companies with properties to go around to the video game companies and say, hey, why don't you make a game about, Cabbage Patch Dolls or whatever? And movies were kind of the same thing. But making a video game about a movie in the era was extremely challenging. When we started looking at possibly doing a Ghostbusters video game, our licensing people had talked to their licensing people and knew that the license was available. And so Tom Lopez, who was the guy doing that, came into the lab one day and he said, I got a script for this movie. It uses a bunch of the Saturday Night Live guys, and it could be really funny. And you never know. I mean, you try to take a license before a movie comes out, you have no idea if it's going to be a flop or not. But we all read the script and said, yeah, this looks pretty fun. But we were very late in the process. The movie was about to come out, or I don't know if it had come out yet, or it was really very close. And so it takes, a year to make a game. And I said, if we make a game today and that movie comes out, is anybody going to even remember the name Ghostbusters a year from now? Of course, we shouldn't have had to worry about that. I mean, obviously, it became a cult hit. But with any property, you have to ask that question, worry about it. So nobody had taken the license. We were probably the company's first choice because of Activision's success. But the question is, do you take this license? And I basically stepped up and I said, if it takes a year to make a game, I'd say no. Let's not do this license. But I have a game that is 2/3 of the way done, and I could take that game and redesign it and retask it and put it in the Ghostbusters universe and, share some of the interesting, the fun things they have, like the crossing the streams and whatever else, the capturing ghosts and traps and such. So I took a game which its working title was Car Wars, which had a car. It had an in-game economy where you would buy weapons to put on the car, and you would drive around and get from point A to point B, then arrive at places in the city and have a fight and whatever. And I turned the car into a top view of the Ghost Mobile. I changed the items in the store from weapons to traps, and Ghost Vacuum had to make up something, right? And anyway, retasked the thing so that I was able to create a game in a reasonable period of time, and it came out, while the movie was still popular and was very successful.
Because I remember getting that game when the real Ghostbusters cartoon started a couple of years later, and that you kind of answered quite a lot there, because I did wonder why there was stuff like the Ghost Vacuum in the game that wasn't in the movie and the cartoon, for example. But I guess that kind of makes sense. If I imagine you didn't see the movie until the game was pretty much almost done.
Right, we had the script. We always would at least have the script, so we know kind of what's going on. But we didn't have any imagery from the movie or whatever, and I just created that driving sequence where vacuuming up a ghost was something that you could do. It really wasn't. In my theory, you don't make a movie game just be the movie and make it interactive. Basically, to be successful, you need to create a game that would stand alone, whether it isn't tied into the movie license or not. So I would think of what would be fun to do. If you're driving along and there's ghosts, trying to maneuver over and suck them up in a vacuum was just a fun thing to do. And it just happened to be that it was the Ghostbusters car and they were ghosts, whereas they could have been something else that you were vacuuming up. So really the theory is not look at the movie and try to take elements out of the movie and make them interact with each other, as much as look at the universe that the movie is in, and using some imagery from the movie if you can, make a game that's fun to play. That's my theory, my philosophy of the best way to go about making a movie.
See, to me, that was a game that I played when I was about, 6 years old. That's one of the reasons I love doing this podcast, that we can chat to the kind of the people who shaped our childhood, really.
Yeah.
Which is nuts. I never thought I'd get the chance to chat to the guy who made the Ghostbusters video game.
Well, when you were seeing those credits on the screen, you're kind of like, ooh, who is this distant person? And now you know all the secrets.
I'll be talking to him on a podcast in 30 years. Yeah, I never thought of that back in the day. But that was just a little snapshot of the Retro Hour podcast in 2018. If you've enjoyed these clips today, because I know people dip in and out of episodes, don't they? Go back and check them out. We'll have the full links to all the episodes in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Next week, guys, when you come in the studio, we'll have some Christmas decorations up. There'll be mince pies and selection boxes later.
I was about to say, there better be some bloody mince pies.
Maybe even some booze to hopefully celebrate with after you win
hopefully
the quiz next week.
And we've got a new quiz mistress as well.
We have. Your missus is coming in, isn't she?
Oh, really? I was about to say, I need to butter up Dan's mistress, as she's been
mistress.
Mistress.
Or my wife, take your pick.
Your wife, whatever.
Either of them will do.
But no, we'll be going for Ravi's then. All right, okay.
Yeah. There is a theory.
Prepare for shouting. That's all I'm going to say.
So I did have this theory the other day. I thought, if you guys win, maybe Samantha's been artificially marking you down.
Don't get me started on that. That's a whole new kettle of fish.
But we shall see next week, because it is going to be the Retro Hour annual Christmas super quiz. I want cheesiest Christmas jumpers.
Always.
You've got a week to revise now. Just go and look at everything to do with video games.
We're going to be called Team Phoenix, because we're rising from the ashes.
Jesus, we didn't agree on that.
You guys sort that out off air. Next week, though, we'll be here for the Christmas Super Quiz and our final episode of 2018. Thank you so much for your support in 2018. It's meant a lot to us. Long may it continue, and we'll see you next week for the annual Christmas Super Quiz.
Ciao.
Cheers.